few notes down. I might. There we go.
Yes, so you were telling me you were reading the Handbook to Mankind.
Yeah, I was. I'll probably get to synthesizing it later today or tomorrow, but it was just good for showing where exactly, well, sort of where you're coming from in terms of being a student of Buddha Daso. Sort of the whole where Buddhism being like the practice, like the theoretical knowledge that the Buddha taught was also the practical knowledge. They sort of exist symbiotically.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite helpful, quite a helpful overview of Buddhism. I was looking for something just like that, actually. I was thinking of getting Thich Nhat Hanh's The Core of Buddhism or The Heart of Buddhism, but this seems to have served the same purpose, so it was a good read.
Mm-hmm. Well, basically, it appears that directly in the suttas and the way that things were going in the time of the Buddha, that the language he used and the concepts that he would create all had to do with the practice that led to liberation. And that it was only in later centuries where the concepts became theoretical.
Mm-hmm.
And once they became theoretical, boy, did they start growing like mushrooms. But the actual core teachings of the Buddha is quite small. And yet, the growing, the theoretical, and all of that happened is the outcome of it is the Buddhist religion that you have today. Now, I would say this, that both the Buddhist religion and Christianity have the same issue. And that is that they started with a root teacher. And then over time, things started to happen and things changed and people would have arguments, etc., like that. And so there was resolutions that wound up being complicated. And an example of that is the Trinity, which is a core foundation of Christianity. But Jesus didn't even think about it. That he had a different use of the word the Son of God. And that it looks like that what he was talking about and referencing, though he was misunderstood in his day, was using it in the sense of son of a gun or son of a bitch. That's this kind of usage, which means the son of doesn't have anything to do with procreation, but it does have to do with affiliation. And yet you can imagine if I said I was a son of a Buddha, that I would get a lot of Buddhist flack from that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And yet that's exactly the way that it's being used, is the association. So when he says that he is son of God, or let us say that when he was cornered, he would admit to it. That it didn't have the connotation that it has been maneuvering and growing over the centuries. And there's a lot of stuff that's associated with the Buddha that happened in that same way. One of the things, though, that I would say is that there seems to be two full threads or stories about the Buddha. One completely magical and one completely ordinary. And that over time, the magical grew to gigantic proportions.
Mm-hmm.
But that the thread of the practical teachings of the Buddha has always remained, to where the core teachings of Jesus seem to have gotten completely trampled, so that there is no path of liberation, though he was laying one out. And you can hear some of the stuff that Jesus said and understand it in the Buddhist context, you say, oh, yeah, I know exactly what he was talking about. Without a doubt, we understand precisely what Jesus was meaning when he was using terms in Greek like basilica theos. And the word basilica is translated into the word kingdom, but we know what a basilica is. It's the very, very largest, most ornate of the cathedrals will be called a basilica. All right. And that's where God is. Jesus also would say it in the sense that I am within God and God is within me. Now, what that actually means on a very liberal or literal basis in physics is that the molecules are both inside the body and molecules are outside the body. But that really reduces God to just molecules and the laws that are associated with molecules and particles. Well, by gum and by glory, that's the laws that we are most subject to, the laws of nature. And that if we live according to the laws of nature, then we'll be really happy because now we're in the kingdom of God. But if we live against the laws of nature, then we are creating discord, disharmony that may lead all the way to suffering. And so Bhikkhu Buddhadasa, I don't know if he mentioned that in his book, has to do with the quality of duty to the Dhamma. That we all have a duty to the Dhamma.
Can't remember exactly, but he might have. I think I remember something of a similar vein.
All right. Now, the duty to the Dhamma is kind of just out there. It's been mentioned and whatnot. But as a monk, let us say, grows in the Dhamma to where he really understands it well, that's when his teachers will start to emphasize more and more this quality of duty to the Dhamma. And that the further we do our duty to the Dhamma, the happier life will be. Now, that actually causes a catch-22 based upon the way that humans live. And that is that the way that we train our children is, an example would be sending them to school. In kindergarten, the kids get to do more and more of what they like to do, but somehow or another, something happens, and all of a sudden now you've got to learn this. Sit down and do your homework, or clean your room, or whatever like that. And what that leads to is the child will do what he's told to do and resents it.
Not out of duty.
Not the right attitude. We have the attitude of the loser, which says, I'm doing this because I have to do it. We hold the entire society is based upon that. Now, Bhikkhu Buddhadasa, in some of his stuff, talks about being reborn in one of the woeful states. Being reborn in hell, being reborn in the ghostly world, being reborn as an animal, or being reborn as an asura, which is a kind of a heavenly guy, but they're more like the Titans. We'll talk about it later. Going back to this one about the animal, this is what is really at the heart of the problem, is that we do not want to do our duties because we were trained as children to see duty as doing what we were told to do. And you see that teenagers really get into that in the sense of fitting in, going along to get along. Only now their whole desire is to go along to get along, to be in the group, but they resent their the authority figures, the teachers, everybody else, and so it creates a dichotomy within, because the going along to getting along with the teenagers among themselves is ultimately taught by the adults, in the sense of, you're here at school going along to get along. And so this is a major issue, and this is why it would be called one of the woeful states. We do things foolishly. We don't think through. We do it because we think that we should do it, but we really don't enjoy doing it.
Mm-hmm.
The place that you're going to most likely begin to understand that is your own resistance to practicing anapanasati.
Yeah, I had a massive resistance to it for years and years now. I finally sort of got around to it a bit, and I'm enjoying it a bit more.
All right. So that's the whole point, is almost all of meditation is taught in the sense that it's a good thing that you should do.
Mm-hmm.
When I look at that phrase, it's a good thing that you should do, whether you like to do it or not, because it's eventually going to give some results. This whole concept of delayed gratification is what the laws of karma, that is so common in India and in Hinduism. It's spread around the world, but you can see it's also the basis of Christianity,
Mm-hmm.
in the sense of uh, you you invest in this in the bank, but you cannot get your money out of the bank until you're dead and the bank is burned down. Only then can you get your results. And so that whole concept of delayed gratification, or it's also taught in music. And if the child never actually enjoys playing music from the beginning, that if he's doing it because his dad brought home a trumpet and says, "Here, play this," the child may never get very good at the trumpet. He's only doing it out of duty.
Mm-hmm.
And so we also practice meditation like that, doing it because we hear that it's supposed to be good for us. And yet, the clear examples of the outcome of uh, any kind of practice, but let's focus on correct practice,
Mm-hmm.
because if in fact correct practice is widespread and still shows no visible results, then what can we say about incorrect practice? Because that's certainly not going to work.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is the real issue: is that Buddhism has been brought to the West very similar, because it's part of the mindset of the Christian society, and that is that you do it now and get your benefits later, but the benefits are magical, and therefore you can't see them.
Mm-hmm. Requires that leap of faith.
So we have to change our attitude from the very, very beginning of practice, because in fact, that's when practice really starts, is when we begin to change our attitude about it,
Mm-hmm.
and start to watch then on a long-term basis for this thing that we will call resentment. I've got another call coming in. Do you mind if we have someone join the call?
Sure thing.
This is Eric. Oh, So we were talking about resentment. That's the word that I'm using for it. But
hey, how's it going, guys? I don't know if my video is showing up. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
I can't see you, but I can hear you, yeah.
Oh, here we go.
All right. Well, this is Jacob.
Hey, Jacob.
He lives
That's
in
me.
Perth, Australia. And this is Eric. I think that he is captured someplace east of Oklahoma.
In Arkansas. Yeah, you're right. East of Oklahoma, yeah.
Fort Sill, to be specific, on I-40.
Yeah, well, close enough.
Fort Smith, right.
Fayetteville, right next to Fort Smith.
Mm-hmm. So this is Jacob's second call, and we're just getting into the basics and talking about attitude for correct practice. So if you don't mind, you can listen right along, and you might have some questions of your own.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, because what we're talking about is relevant throughout one's career or throughout one's practice until it becomes completely playful.
Yeah. Always good to have a reminder.
All right. And so basically the topic is about the word resentment. And as a review, resentment is one of the ways that English language talks about the situation that the Buddha talked about and Bhikkhu Buddhadasa talked about, in the sense of being reborn as an animal. Now, animals are very stupid. But one of the qualities of domesticated animals, in fact, there's only two kinds of animals that humans will deal with. Domesticated animals, which means we either raise them to kill them later or raise them to put them to work. And those animals that do not fit into that category are just subject to just killing them. And so we're talking about not all animals, but we're talking about the domesticated animals that we can put to work. Dogs, donkeys, mules, horses, cattle, that kind of animal. And that one of the things that we do with these animals is that we put them to work, but we never describe to them what work we're putting them to, nor do we ask their permission. And so the dumb donkey has to go around in a circle carrying a big heavy load on his back, a pole that goes to a center point that's attached to a mill. And there the farmer is putting his grain into this mill, and the donkey doesn't have any concept about what that mill is about. All he's got to do is to go around and around and around in that circle. He has no choice about it. All right. And so this is the lowest part of the quality of the concept. Well, we as children in almost every society, there's a few exceptions, but almost every society does this to the children, that we treat our children like animals. We put them to work. Go clean your room. Why should I clean my room? You do as you were told to do. Or they will say, as I said so. In other words, I'm treating you like a dumb animal. It's not for you to figure out what we're talking about. It's for you to go do it. You have no choice because I'm bigger than you are. And so you have been raised that way. Or have you not? Eric, you would agree with that.
Yeah.
In spades, right. And Jacob, too. You understand what we're talking about here.
Definitely.
All right.
Can't say I've had much success getting my son to clean his room, but...
Well, why do you want him to clean his room? Sorry, I'm really waiting for this opening. This is great. Number one, okay, why do you want him to clean his room?
Mostly so that he'll have a place to play I think. And then he
Oh,
plays, and playing, he messes it up. And then he doesn't want to go in there anymore because there's no footpath.
Ah, okay. So, basically what you're saying is that you don't like it, but now you also admitted that he doesn't like it either.
Mm-hmm.
And so now both of you are in a state of not liking. And so, why don't you go clean it up? If you don't like it, why don't you go clean it up?
I usually do.
Does he join and help?
Yeah, if you call it help, I guess. He's 4, so
he's still made to do it, and he still resents it. Right. Okay, well, this is the excellent time to start training him correctly. Otherwise, you're going to set him into the same old thing that you were raised in.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, do you think that he would think that it was funny if you played with him while you were cleaning his room? In other words, you see something on the floor, you're both in the same room, you look at something on the floor and says, wow, what's this?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to really enjoy that one. Let's put that in the box over there, and we'll put things between favorite toys in this box and things that we don't like so much in that box. What do you think? And so what you do is you get him engaged, you ask him questions, and you get him to take over. Rather
Sometimes
than
I'll grab a bag
you
and
become
sort of
the
make it
two-year-old in the room.
Yeah. I'll grab a bag and make it sort of a basketball, situation, or, where he's throwing all the toys in his bag, or.
Right, that's right. You hold that bag up like it was a basketball net, and you say, hey, can you get it in? Let me see. Yeah, you did it. All right. So this is the way that we begin to train children if we want them to not be in that state of an animal, to not be reborn as an animal, doing things that we're told to do and resenting it.
Maybe that's how you should tell him. Tell him to clean his room. Tell him he'll be reborn as an animal if he doesn't clean his room.
Actually, you got it.
I think he's a little too skeptical for that.
That's when he's reborn as an animal, doing what he's told to do. But if it's his idea, if he likes it.
Yeah. I think he inherited my skepticism. We can barely get him to believe in Santa Claus, so.
It's the first I've heard.
Why would you want him to believe in lies?
Listen, I don't want to, but my wife is adamant. Society is adamant in perpetuating a lie. So I tried to argue my case.
Actually, it sounds what you just said before, that you'd won because he's skeptical. So that's all you have to do is just argue your case, but do so joyfully, because they're going to argue their case like this. And if you argue his case like this, he'll probably take your side, because yours is fun and joyful and playful and real.
Yeah.
Where theirs is based upon authority that does not have to be understood in order to be obeyed. Now let's take this down to the real issue. The real issue is this is often the attitude that will happen from time to time with meditators, no matter how experienced they are. In fact, it's possible for someone to get really, really excellent practice for not just diligently, but let's say persistently and happily over a long period of time till he reaches a state of more or less perpetual happiness. And then something happens. Let's say he's got a new gig to play and he's got to learn a new tune or something. Or it has to do with his practice in the sense of resenting. Here's the way it's stated. I have worked so long and so hard to get so free in this Buddhism. Why do I have to keep doing it? In other words, I'm looking for the results of not having to obey the laws of the Dhamma anymore. And so the resentment then can creep in at any particular time, because that's the way that we're raised as children, is to do what we're supposed to do and resent it. And so it seems then there's kind of what we would call a box of four, where you have a line this way and a line this way. And on one side, you have that you do it, and then on the other side, you don't do it. And then below the line is how you feel about it. You don't like it, but you do it. Or that you have the choice of liking whether you do it or not. And that we have to learn to separate these two in the mind, so that you can see that whether you do it or not does not depend upon whether you like it or not. And that if you decide to do it and not liking it, then you're in that animal state, or what we can also call as the victim. Fritz Perls, a very famous psychologist back in the 60s and 70s, spent a lot of time at Esalen Institute. He had the concept of top dog and underdog. How are you going to live your life? Are you going to live your life on top, or are you going to live your life as the underdog? Well, that underdog is then the animal that has to submit and do what he's told to do, and resents it. And that we do that almost every time that we make a choice about doing something. The question is, are we going to do something because we enjoy doing it, or are we going to do something because it needs to be done, and I don't want to do it, but I got to do it? An example of that would be, here you are with your family tooling down the highway, and you recognize you got a flat tire. So how are you going to change that flat tire? Let's assume that the car is completely equipped. It's got all the stuff there that you need. Are you going to change that tire and resent changing the tire, thereby giving your 4-year-old an example? Are you going to say, hot diggity dog, I wanted to play with that spare tire anyway. Here we go. We got a perfect opportunity. Let's get that stuff out and change that tire. And then you can teach him all about how to change a tire, and do so with great joy. The likelihood when he's older, he will also be able to change a tire in great joy, rather than changing that tire in resentment. Now, the other side of the coin, though, is to not change the tire. And we can...
Yeah.
But then we'll resent not changing the tire, because we're resenting not going down the highway. Here we are, stuck out in the middle of nowhere. So let's start looking at that attitude, because it's very powerful. That quality of resentment about doing things that we have to do, knowing that have to do is still a choice that we're making, because not doing it is so much more resentment built into it. But then we recognize, wait a minute, resentment or joy is my choice whether I do it or not.
Yeah.
So that's one of the most important qualities of practice. So when we begin practice, let's do so in a way that it is enjoyable and we're getting benefit out of it. So that not after 2 or 3 years you're saying, oh, well, I got to go put in 45 minutes is my time for meditation. Wait a minute, I should have done that 10 minutes ago. And now it's 10 minutes later and I'm still resenting it and I haven't gone to do my meditation. But if we go with the attitude immediately of hot diggity dog, let me take a deep breath and enjoy this moment, then that's the beginning to have that change of attitude. And we also know that that attitude change is actually part of the Eightfold Noble Path. It's the second item listed after Panya, or wisdom, or right noble view, Samaditi. And so if we have the right view, then we can easily gain the right attitude with just an extra tiny couple of little skills, like one, remembering that we have a choice about what attitude we're going to take and the effort that it takes to get into that attitude. So those 4 things are the major part of the Eightfold Noble Path. And yet people think that meditation is over here and the Eightfold Noble Path and the Four Noble Truths are over here, and they've somehow gotten separated from the actual practice itself and has become part of the theory. But it's not part of the theory. It's the practice. The Eightfold Noble Path is the practice. And the rationale behind the practice is the first noble truth, which is one's right view. And so it becomes kind of a neat little ball to look at, to recognize that the Dhamma is not really sophisticated at all, but that we have made it sophisticated because we've conceptualized, and then we have theorized, and then we have religiousized, and with each step it's like the power of 10. So we started with 1, and then it goes to 10, and then it's to 100, and then it's to 1,000. And somewhere within that whole 1,000 of the Buddhist religion, there is that one, which is the actual teachings of the Buddha. And that is the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Noble Path, and the way to practice those things with anapanasati. That anapanasati and the Four Noble Truths are deeply embedded. And so now we add something in which seems also theoretically and a different topic, and that is jhana, or most specifically, first jhana. Because everything, I believe everybody knows, anything about jhana at all knows that you cannot do second jhana unless you know how to do first jhana. That's almost like saying if you can't play chopsticks on the piano, you don't have a chance at the Revolutionary Etude by Chopin. And so that first jhana then is in fact what the Buddha talked about as the path to enlightenment, or better still, this is it. If we can get ourselves into first jhana and maintain that state of first jhana, what else is there to want? Because that first jhana has that extraordinarily important quality of complete satisfaction. That's one of the 5 factors of the first jhana, where we gather things together. So another of them is what is called piti, or the English language translation of that is rapture, though I do not think that anyone who uses the word rapture would use it in the context that we're talking about here.
Pity is sort of like the physical sensation, isn't it?
It can be,
Yeah.
and eventually when it's developed, it is. But in the beginning, it's going to be, at the very basic, it's going to be a concept. Then it becomes an affirmation. Then it becomes a slight experience. Then it becomes a full experience. And then it becomes sensational. And I mean that with the full context of the word sensation.
Mm.
All right. And that we experience other emotions the same way. For instance, anger can be experienced to the fullest flower, and yet still people will deny it. Me, I'm not angry. You shut up. I'm not angry. So this is one of the things that we can understand, because it's the bodily movements that are actually sensational that give rise to that people clench their fist. They go into kind of a boxing mode. The throat will get tight. All kinds of things will be experiential, sensational, that have to do with getting angry. Heat. We get hot. And in fact, anger is one of those things that we need to talk about a little bit also, because that's the state of being reborn in hell. It's either anger or anxiety would be being reborn in as a hell being. Because when people are angry, they become ferocious. They become like devils. I mean, you look at all of the photos and all of that kind of stuff about what a devil is. That's what you become. That everything and everybody who's in hell is a devil, and they're acting devilishly. They want to harm. They want to hurt. And they're doing it out of a sense of bodily sensation and the chemicals that are associated with that, like adrenaline, cortisol, and that kind of stuff. But if we can also operate with rapture and pity to the point of bringing on a nice hit of dopamine and serotonin, then we're being able to control it. But most people don't spend time in dopamine and serotonin. They go looking for it. Pornography is one of the ways that people go looking for it. Buying a new car, getting a new job. One of the things that I will admit to, of all the stupid things that I've done in my life, is that I used to go on job interviews with no intention of taking the job. Why? Because I really like that hit of being the star of the show and getting the job. One of the really dumb things. I mean, how many people do that one? I guess quite a few.
Never heard that one before.
I can see that, though. I mean, some of the most tense, exciting experiences I've ever had are job interviews.
Exactly.
They're really some of the most memorable experiences, you can have. You're right on the.
Don't give me justification for my stupidity.
It's still crazy, but.
So this is what we're looking for. We're looking for a high. We're looking for a hit. We're looking for success. And so that's possibly the best way to understand what pity is all about. It's the success that we have. And if you look at, for instance, guys out on the football field, when they make the touchdown, they go into all kinds of, I mean, they spike the ball, they throw in the air, they raise their arms. Maybe the teammates will come and grab the guy and put him up in the air and all of this. All right. These are physical manifestations and sensations of the joy of success. That's why they play football. Can you imagine what a game would be like if after the guy makes the touchdown, he hands it politely to the ref and says, "That was nice." And everybody in the stands says, "Yay, ho hum, another touchdown." That sport's going to die. In fact, I think that's what happened to baseball. Is it became too statistical. It became too much like, yes, that was a home run, but how many home runs has he had this year? In other words, we take it out of the present moment and put it into the past and to the future. And we do that by conceptualizing it. So let's get back to the actual experience, the actual feeling of winning. Well, how is that going to be possible in meditation if we're doing it out of obligation? In other words, we're resenting our meditation. That resentment for doing the meditation or hoping that we're going to get something out of it at a future time is not conducive to having this great joy. And the answer is, well, what kind of success could I possibly have squatting on the floor doing this thing called anapanasati? Well, actually, the joy would be that you can actually clean out your own mind and start thinking the things you want to think rather than the things that you're in the habit of thinking. That's marvelous. That's unique. That's something that very, very few people have control over. Almost everyone spends time in the woeful states because they don't have any control over their minds. And so if you had a choice of anger, anxiety, fear, wanting something, desperately wanting something, hungry for something, or doing what you were told to do and resenting it, or being in a state of great joy and satisfaction, which would you choose? I assume that that's not rhetorical, that you would choose the last one. And yet look how much time people spend in the first four. That we don't spend our time in joy. And yet we could. Our choice. And yet we don't. So what happens then is that we start to develop patterns, habit patterns, so that it makes that joy extremely rare. Only occasionally. And for the football player, he has to strive and work all week long, prepare for that game so that he can have one or two moments of great joy. He'd probably been better off if he were sitting in a cave having joy all day long. Like Bodhidharma. So this is the way that we want to look at our practice. When we sit down to practice, we're going to make sure that we're doing it with the right attitude in the beginning as we're sitting down, but then throughout the sitting practice time, we need to continue to take the mind out of that animal state, out of that underdog, out of that loser, out of that victim state, into the state of joy, into the state of championship, and that we can do that just by remembering to do it. And then we start to practice it. Well, now what we're looking at is we're beginning to get the jhana factors together. The most important jhana factor would be freedom from the hindrances. Well, I just gave you a list of the hindrances and feelings, But let's add an additional one, and that would be junk thoughts. And mostly the junk thoughts that we have are because of problems that need to be solved or dissatisfactions that we have. And therefore, junk thoughts and anxiety are associated. Junk thoughts and anger are associated. Just ordinary thoughts, the mind just wandering around is sure to wander into a cesspool. If we're not watching where we're going out in the cow pasture, we're more than likely going to step on a cow pie. That's just the way that things are. And if we're doing our duty to the Dhamma, we're watching where we're going so that we don't step into the cow pies. So what we mean by that is the wandering means that we're not watching where we're going. And so we're in a state of hindrance. We're in a state of junk thoughts. We're in a state of feelings arising, passing away, etc., like that. And then we wake up. What do we wake up to? Oh, well, I'm here to get the very best value out of practice, out of my meditation. And that waking up process then is actually the beginning of the experiencing of the mind. So now the first thing that happens in that regard would be step 9 of Anapanasati. Even though it's called step 9, it's actually the first thing that happens is that we experience that the mind has wandered away. We experience that the mind has been in hindrance. That's the wake up. So sati is like the same thing as step 9, but step 9 can get much more sophisticated in the sense that we begin to know when the mind is dull or when it's sharp. We can see when it's exalted, when it's pure, when it's adulterated, all kinds of things we can begin to see from the mind just by looking. And so sati is the very first waking up to recognize that we can see that the mind, in this regard, the mind has wandered away from the breath. Also, that's the point when we recognize with right view that, oh, I'm not just going to sit here and let the mind wander away and magically hope that the karma machine is going to make me happy after I do 300 hours or 3,000 hours or 30 years of meditation. Someday I'm going to be happy if I sit here long enough. That's because that's just more junk thoughts. And that junk thought also has the quality of, but right now, I'm in a state of dissatisfaction. So really what happens with real sati is that we wake up to the fact that we are in a state of dissatisfaction and we're going to do something about it. So that's where step 10 comes in, of gladdening the mind, and that's also associated with right attitude, right effort. The right effort needs to come in, and the one's right effort is to gladden the mind and to take it out of hindrance. Once the mind is out of hindrance, and by the way, that happens immediately. If we have a little phrase like, oh, hi, I saw you, Mr. Junk Thought. Oh, well, I don't have to think that stuff anymore. I can think better things than that. That I don't have to send that hate email to some college professor whose article I read and I don't agree with him. So I want him to go back to my kind of kindergarten. So we can recognize, oh, I'm writing a kind of an email that I probably am not ever going to send anyway. Why am I thinking about that? All right. That why am I thinking about that? That's the wake up. Aha, I see you, Mr. Junk Thought. And by having that thought, we have already brought ourselves out of it. It's that easy to come out of hindrances, but it's just as easy to go right back in. So we have to start to watch how quick those hindrances come back. But when we can rid the mind of hindrance, that's marvelous. That's wonderful. That because I don't do that often enough. This is where the success comes in. especially with the aha, I caught you, the gladdening the mind. And now the next aspect of right effort is to begin to take a deep breath. Long breath. Noticing that in-breath, noticing the way that the body changes. And that in-breath is almost like the same thing as the satisfaction and the joy that I don't have to think my junk thoughts anymore. I can think things that are happy, wholesome, useful, beneficial instead. In other words, we just now came out of the animal world and we're back to being a human. And we do that by breathing, taking a deep breath, and becoming satisfied that the mind is no longer in that state of being an animal, no longer in the state of wanting meditation to do something, and now actually getting it to do something right here, right now, in this very moment. And so I begin to expand that. With each breath I take, I'm going to increase and encourage really good feelings. Going back to that quality that I mentioned before you called, Eric, about Basilica Theos, that God is within you. So you can imagine taking a breath. Every breath that you take is a breath of God. Every breath you take is a breath of life-giving energy. Every breath that you take is the very best thing that you can do. If you don't believe me, stop breathing for about 5 or 10 minutes and see how much you enjoy that first breath. So
if you're around to take it.
Yeah, all right. So when you start doing that, you can have concepts of this breath is a breath of fresh air. This breath is a breath of God itself. That I am filling the interior so that God comes within. Now, for some people, they don't like the word God, but you find a word that really has the quality of this is good stuff. This is the very best there is. And it comes in through the breath, through the air. You can make oxygen your God. You can put little signs of O2 up all over the house. And every time you see a sign O2, you go, thank you for reminding me I can breathe. And so this whole quality then of breathing the air and being in the present moment to enjoy that in-breath rather than having the mind focused on all of the crap that it's normally focused on is a great joy. So this is what the Buddha refers to as seclusion. That we're secluded from the hindrances. We're secluded from all of the crap that we normally are into, and that we feel like a champion, we feel like a winner, and we become satisfied with that. And now we really got the jhana factors starting to click. Number 1, free from hindrances. Number 2, satisfaction. Number 3, success. The next one comes in is to making the mind fit for work. That's a term that Bhikkhu Buddhadasa uses. The mind fit for work means that the mind is energized, and it's getting energized because we're doing some breathing, getting the mind fit for work. So now we can apply the mind to the things that it needs to be applied to, and then we can sustain that kind of thought. This applied and sustained thought, this quality of the first jhana, with the rapture and piti born of seclusion, now are all 5 of the jhana factors. Now, there is a state that humans go into on a regular basis that is something like the first jhana. It doesn't have all the qualities of it, But let's look at the quality of being able to read. Read the article on the internet, read a book, read a newspaper, whatever it is that we're reading. There are two ways to read. One is to remain focused, to see what it is, to be interested and curious and want to know what's there. And then the other way is to read it with interest, but then we read something that becomes interesting as a point, and we start to think about that while the eyes are continuing to go along the page, so that we get down to the bottom of the paragraph and then maybe start the next paragraph. Wait a minute, I'm not reading, I'm thinking. The eyes are watching the page, but the mind is not comprehending it. The mind is now in junk thought. You both probably have experienced both kinds of reading. Yeah. That when you're really curious, when you're really interested in something, you can follow it. When you really want to know. But if the interest and the curiosity is not strong enough, then the ordinary wandering mind will just wander away. And then all the intention of reading is there, but the reading is not happening. Junk thoughts are happening instead. So let's now look at that and bring that to meditation, or sorry for using that word, because that's a Christian word that doesn't really have much of anything to do with what we're actually doing here. We're actually practicing anapanasati, which means the mindfulness of the breathing. We want to put that curiosity, to add that as an ingredient here, and that curiosity would be considered, let us call it, the hindrance of doubt plus joy. In other words, we're curious because we're doubting, we don't know something, but we're interested and we're investigating, we're looking at it. And so this is actually another way of thinking about what is one's right view. One's right view is to look. In other words, to be able to read properly. But instead of reading a book, we're reading our own mind, our own being, and we're doing it with these other factors of having the mind free from hindrances, having the mind that is in a state of joy, in a state of satisfaction, in a state of success, and having the mind truly fit for work. Which means we can apply the mind to something and then sustain it there. Well, what's worthwhile doing? What's worthwhile thinking about? Well, what we're doing is worth thinking about, and what we're doing is the Four Noble Truths. What we're doing is the Eightfold Noble Path. So spending our time thinking about the Eightfold Noble Path and the Four Noble Truths in relationship to what I'm doing right now, that's one thing that's really worthwhile thinking about. And so we're going to guard the mind to keep it in the state of joy. We're going to guard the mind to keep it in the state of satisfaction. Guard the mind to keep it focused on what it needs to be focused on. And if we can do that, that's first jhana in spades. And not only that, but it's the fruit of first jhana. That feeling of satisfaction and that feeling of focusedness is really, it's a sophisticated feeling, but it's satisfying. It really is satisfaction. Because now we've got everything that we want, everything that we need in this present moment. That we got the body energized, we're feeling good, we're breathing, we're experiencing the body. And then boredom, for instance, will come up. Oh, I've done this. I've had about as much of that joy as I can stand. Let me out of here. Where's that bell? I'll ring it my damn self if nobody else will. You know that feeling, right? You can have that joy. But here's the point. Sati comes back in and he says, oh, look, boredom has just set in. Oh, look, I want this to be over. Oh, look, I have just become an animal. I am now resenting even my own joy. Let me put that aside. Let me chase that hindrance out. Let's be on guard for that kind of stuff. Let's take another deep breath. Let's say, aha, I caught you, Mr. Junk Thought, about boredom. And let's come back to a state of joy, back to a state of satisfaction. And so we develop each one of these things as a skill. These are skills to be developed. The skill of pity or success. Sukha. Now, here's there's an interesting point. Sukha. This is step number 6 of Anapanasati. Sukha is actually the opposite of the word dukkha. They're used as opposites in both the Thai language and in the Pali. But we don't really have a word for the opposite of suffering. Then, in fact, most people will hear about Buddhism and they'll hear about suffering and they'll say, oh, I'm not suffering, and then they'll finish. But if we can talk about slight states of dissatisfaction, slight states of dissatisfaction can be turned upside down into satisfaction, into sukha, into pleasure, into being really satisfied and content with this moment. Another quality of it also is the quality of safety. Safety is that which it's got to do with the asuras, or being afraid. In other words, it's a woeful state, it's a hell state, and the asuras are like titans. They're heavenly warriors, but they are also low-class heavenly warriors, which means the only ones that they can war against are the higher heavenly warriors, or the higher ones who are not at war, who will probably beat them. And so the asuras don't go to war because they're afraid to go to war. This is what fear is all about. And so we can think of it as a woeful state. It's a mental state. It's a state of fear. Now, it's unlikely that you're going to have big fearful states while sitting in meditation. Maybe somebody drops a book, or thunder or lightning happens, and then if you're not mindful, will have a reaction to that. Sometimes even the heart will start to race. But when we're back into this state of satisfaction, that's also a state of security or safety. And that safety component is part of the satisfaction. And so now we've got the jhana factors together. We've got success. We've got satisfaction and safety. We also have the mind fit for work, that we can apply it and keep it sustained on things that are worthwhile thinking about, and that we're on guard to make sure that nothing comes into the mind that is unwholesome and unworthy of our state of satisfaction. In other words, that state of boredom means that now all of a sudden we become dissatisfied with satisfaction. How can that be? In fact, we've lost our state of satisfaction. Let's get back into that state of satisfaction as an antidote to feeling bored with the practice. And so this is basically what Anapanasati is. And we've covered many of the steps. We covered the breathing, which is first tetrad. And we've also covered rapture and piti, which is part of Vedana. And we've been covering also the quality of the mind, and that the quality that I haven't been speaking about directly is also the recognition that things are changing all the time. To recognize you were in a state of satisfaction and now you're in a state of boredom. But you can change it back from a state of boredom back into satisfaction, your choice. Don't let the changes go into a state of dukkha. It's better to, if you're going to change from one state of anatta to another state of anatta, to go from one state of satisfaction to another state of satisfaction. And so that we begin to capitalize on that, or begin to note momentarily when we get into a state of dissatisfaction and pull ourselves back out of it. And this is how we practice. In the beginning, we do it for about 45 minutes a day in a secluded place. So you first seclude ourselves from the outside world, and now the job is to seclude ourselves from that outside world that we have actually brought on the inside. We're going to clean that out and leave that empty space so that our mental interior becomes a basilica. It's got something holy, something worthwhile, something nice, something sacred on the inside, as opposed to be filled with our own past junk. And so every time that we remember, this is why sati is such an important skill to be developed. And so we do it for 45 minutes a day to get started. We're in that sign of seclusion. But I don't expect you to have the plan, either one of you, to spend 8 hours to, let's say 15 hours a day in and day out for the next 30 years, just to get and keep your state of satisfaction. And it needs to be able to be practiced because you've got things to do. You've already got a lifestyle. You're not a Bodhidharma with nothing to do and no place to go except to sit down and enjoy the hell out of my moment. But you can practice that. But you can also practice it while you've got things to do, is to make sure that when you do things that you're doing it out of a state of satisfaction rather than out of a state of resentment. So that you can make even the changing of a flat tire a joy for a 4-year-old.
Yeah, I think I'm finding that more and more when switching from practice or whatever I'm doing. If I'm in a state of satisfaction, let's say, if I'm just sitting, if I'm able to just sit and I don't have anything to do, not that I'm practicing necessarily, but that I'm just enjoying life. Yeah.
Right. But that's what Zazen is.
But
that's
that transition,
actual definition of Zazen is just sitting and enjoying the heck out of the fact I've got no place to go and nothing to do.
But I let's say I have a lot of opportunities, to be distracted or to be dissatisfied. I have a lot of opportunities to be dissatisfied. But that transition, when Megan will yell at me and, hey, come in here, and I'm in my state of satisfaction. That's the perfect time to really catch that subtle dissatisfaction. Like, why is this any more dissatisfying, getting up and going to help with the kid? Why am I making all of this time dissatisfying? It's that feeling of dissatisfaction itself that's the culprit, and it pervades everything.
Yes, exactly.
It pervades every little thing, very, very subtle. And that not being maybe I have an advantage not being a Bodhidharma, having to deal with it on every on every level, even in not sitting.
Exactly. Okay. When you were talking about that, it reminded me of let's say a comedy team, Jack Benny and Roscoe. Do you know who Roscoe was? You probably know about Jack Benny. You don't even know Jack Benny.
Roscoe. I know who Jack Benny is.
Okay. Jack Benny was a comedian, and part of his comedy was that he played the violin, but he had a chauffeur. and the chauffeur was named Roscoe. And whenever Jack Benny would get in his act on stage, get into a state of frustration, he'd yell out, "Roscoe!" And then Roscoe would come on the stage, but he would be bounding with joy. "Yes, boss, what can I do for you?" The fact that this is 1940s, 1950s, and Roscoe was black just added to the American comedy of it. But I'm wanting you to look at the fact that Roscoe, in that black part, he played it with great joy. He was the underling. He was, in all the social ways of looking at it, he was the underdog. And yet emotionally, Jack Benny was the underdog and Roscoe was the champion. And so whenever your wife calls, be Roscoe, if you can remember. If Sati is there, you can say, "Yes, dear, what can I do for you? Anything you want, I'll do it." That'll blow her mind because you normally do stuff with resentment rather than with absolute joy. That when she brings a baby to you, instead of, "Okay, I'll take it," say, "Oh, wow, I'm really glad you brought the kid. I really enjoy playing with him." So you can then apply that idea of the flat tire or cleaning up the 4-year-old's room. You can begin to play that with your wife. There is actually a sutta. It's number 31 in the Dinga Nikaya, where the Buddha is giving advice to laymen. And one of the things that he advises is just an item on a list, but wow, it'll change your life if you look at it. And that is to let the wife or whoever you're living with, your partner, let her be the boss completely. Anything that she wants, you can make request of her, but she's the ultimate purveyor. In other words, you intentionally put yourself in that one down position and give her complete authority. But it's not a one down position mentally. It's only a one down position, let's say, in a worldly way. That in fact, you're the champion. Why? Because you don't resent doing what you're told to do. That you enjoy it. "Yes, Roscoe," or "Yes, Jack, what can I do for you?"
Yeah, for me, it's just been really. I think we have kids. We start a family. We're still kind of kids ourselves, and don't really know what we're doing or how to be an adult or what that even means. And then at some point with this whole thing is just about embracing my life, because I was doing all those childish things still that were just a hindrance to me. And I was doing anything but embracing my life, trying to run away from my life. But you just embrace it. It's great.
By embracing it, that is your duty to the Dhamma. And the reason that you have suffering is because you're not doing your duty. Okay? That life is to be lived. Life is a joy. Being alive is so much better than being dead. And yet most people, they think that living is work, and they resent it rather than bringing it in as great joy. It's not a mistake that the Buddha, in fact, he didn't even invent first jhana. That first jhana was already there, but then the people, instead of getting great value out of the first jhana, they wanted more and more, and so they would go into second jhana, and that's what he was trained at, until he found out, oh, wait a minute, that's taking jhana too far. That the middle path is that first jhana. And it's quite a step. One would think that, oh, well, it's only one out of 4 steps. No. The second, third, and fourth jhana are quite easy. The hard one is to get into first jhana, to get the mind free and to stay there. That's the task. And to do so joyfully. And that's the Dhamma. And so if you can't sit down and enjoy yourself in Zazen, how can you expect then to respond to the wife in joy? Or how can you expect to respond to the cop that stops you out on the highway with joy? Normally that's a pretty tense situation for everybody, but it need not be. Hello, officer. I'm really glad to see you. What a nice uniform you've got on. What can I do for you? And if he says, do you know what, blah, 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 you don't have to feel bad. You can say, oh, no, you tell me all about it. You don't have to give him anything that he wants, but you do have to give him joy. That's what the Dhamma requires. And if you don't give the cop joy, he's going to react. Mm-hmm. And in the United States, he may actually shoot you if you're in too much resentment. Mm-hmm. Isn't that interesting? The Dhamma is actually needed in every possible tense situation that you can get yourself into. The answer will be the Dhamma. Do what needs to be done and do it joyfully. As if you're the winner, as if you're Roscoe. Yeah, the cop could be Jack Benny.
Yeah, if you treat people really joyfully, genuinely, you can tell, you know, we have that animal instinct. We can tell when someone's truly joyful, truly happy about what they're doing, and it can really diffuse a situation. But it has to be authentic. Or,
right. Well, that's what we're talking about. Not just authentic, but developed. Mm-hmm. Solid. Strong. But it is developed. It is manufactured. It is a skill to be developed. Even in the Anapanasati Sutta, these various steps are talked about. Train. Mindfully breathing in and mindfully breathing out. One trains in piti. Mindfully breathing in and mindfully breathing out, one trains in sukha. That's exactly right. Take those deep breaths. And so this is a review for the practice for you, Eric, but this is the first time that Jacob has actually heard the process. Mm-hmm. And so when the mind wanders away, Goenka Ji would say, never mind, start again. And so this is the start. This is Anapana. And the sati is to remember over and over and over again that you've got a choice in your life. Are you going to live the life that you've always lived, or are you going to change it to live the kind of life you would really enjoy living? Free from suffering, free from dissatisfaction, free from Rod Stewart in general. You know Rod Stewart? Mm. I can't get no satisfaction. And so that's the way that people are living their whole lives, is they don't get the satisfaction that they're looking for. Occasionally you'll come across a James Brown. In fact, that's a good meditation, the James Brown meditation. Do you know that meditation? Do you know James Brown?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I feel good. Like I knew I would now. I feel good. So that's the way that we practice. Fill that theater, fill that void, feel that emptiness inside with great joy. The holiest thing that you can find, the best that you can feel. All of these words that I'm using are just concepts, but I'm pointing at something that cannot be spoken, but it can be experienced and developed, so that next time it's even as good now or better than it was before. So, Jacob, do you think you can practice this?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Great. And
need
Eric, you know too.
About the anapanasati.
Pardon?
Need more enthusiasm for anapanasati is what you're saying.
Well, absolutely. In fact, enthusiasm is very close to an English language word we call eager.
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually one of the 7 knowledges that leads to the state of Sotapan, is when we become eager to practice the Dhamma. We become eager.
Mm-hmm. Just need to be more like intrinsic motivation to do it. Knowing why we're actually doing it. And this is where what you said earlier about the goal of having a clear and directed mind has just sort of motivated me now.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, this has been quite a haul now. We've been going about an hour and 20 minutes, so let's finish now, unless either one of you got a question.
Oh, I had so many questions popping up into my head during this period between our last call. There's so many that every time I sat, I had questions popping up for you, but I had to turn it into an object of the meditation to quell it. And now the questions have stopped coming.
Yeah, you don't need to question.
Off the mat as well.
Questions in that regard are like doubts.
Yeah.
Yeah, but when you can recognize, oh, that's just another question, let's enjoy the moment instead.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the best way to practice, is that you just see questions as just another hindrance.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. The questions are best asked to the teacher when the teacher is there, not when you're sitting on your cushion. Not a time for questions.
That's when they all pop up, though.
Exactly. All right, well, let's put this call to an end.
Sure thing.
I've had about as much of both of your joy as I can stand for the moment.
See you, Dhammarato.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
See you, Eric.